All right. So Megiddo is an interesting site because it's not mentioned in Tanakh all that many times. And yet in culture and in even in Christianity, more than anything, it occupies an incredibly powerful place. Megiddo is a city in northern Israel, and I'm going to show you in a moment a map of it. And it sits on the crossroads of the Middle East, meaning if you want all the old trade routes go through Megiddo, and therefore it's a very important place. We're going to learn a lot about it. I'll just give you a heads up. When archaeologists dug there are more than 30 layers, and it ended at the end of the time of Bai Cheni. So imagine 30 layers of cities and civilizations in one place. It's there's just so much to uncover. So let's go right into it. A lot of pictures today also. All right, so here we go. Megiddo. Is it Armageddon? Is it overblown? Why is it so important? So take a look at this picture. I'll start you off right away. Why does this seem so important? Why does this site seem so important? Well, this site, again, has a few very important traits. First of all, similar to Yerushalayim, and it has some similarities to Yerushalayim besides for this, it's on a mountain, and it's also sitting on a source of water. So you can wall yourself in, and you can take water without leaving the safety of the city walls. Obviously, that's man-made, but there's a spring of water that's under the city. That's number one. Number two is it's overlooking what is in many ways the breadbasket of the area. It's looking over Emek Yisrael, mountain of Jezreel, and it has a strategic importance if you want to control where that grain goes and where that food goes. And so this is Tel Megiddo, and like I said, there are literally 30 layers. You can see some of the digs. There are 30 layers to this mound, and it's overlooking the valley of Israel. And we're going to see that its greatest days of glory were actually in the days of the kingdom of Israel, in the times of Achav, who we're going to see more about. All right, so here's a model of how it looks. Anyone have an idea of what that big pit is? Anyone have an idea? Because that's a pretty significant pit. Anyone want to try and guess? So the big pit down here in the model of this Megiddo administrative area, I won't even call it a city because it's more of an administrative zone, is a silo. This was filled with grain. So you can imagine how strategic it is. The entire area had its grain brought here, and so that's very important. And obviously, we're going to see the different layers. Here are the different. I see you can't see exactly, but this is a map of the city that has, I think, 30 different points of interest. And so this is it's an important city with multiple layers. When you walk into Megiddo, you'll see this. I'm gonna read some of it. The two people who you see visiting Megiddo. One is the Pope. When he came in 1964, he refused to visit Israel in an official capacity, meaning he refused to go to Tel Aviv or the Knesset, but he did have his meeting with the leaders of Israel in Megiddo. And also on the top, you see that in 1917, one of the big battles of the British Army with the Ottoman Empire was around Megiddo, and so General Allenby made sure to be there. So I'm just going to quickly read this to you. The city of Megiddo played a prominent role in the history of the ancient Near East. Strategically located at the mouth of the Nahal Iron Pass, Megiddo controlled access to the road that linked Egypt with Mesopotamia and Anatolia, the most important trade and military route of that time. Megiddo is the only site in the land of Israel mentioned in the records of all Near Eastern ancient powers and was one of the most fought over cities in the region. The first fully recorded battle in its history in which Pharaoh, I don't know if there are any Egyptologists here who can pronounce his name properly, Thutmosis III, his army faced the coalition of Canaanite kings, and it took place in 1479 BCE. Megiddo is also mentioned in many biblical narratives. Its king was one of the Canaanite rulers defeated by Yehoshua, it listed it is listed among the cities built by King Solomon, and it was the site where two Judite kings, Achaziah and Yoshia, met their deaths. And then for a million of Christians, Megiddo is also a place that's going to be Armageddon. So it's not a place that you necessarily heard about on your first or second tour of Israel, but it's definitely a significant place. Here is 1964, the Pope visiting, and he came to Megiddo. In terms of the psukim, where do we see Megiddo? There's Megiddo in Tanach. Yehoshua lists the kings that he defeated, and Melech Tanach Echad, Melech Megiddo Echad. So Yehoshua says one of the kings that was killed was Megiddo. However, spoiler, 5 prakim later, Vayihi leMenashe beYisachar uveAsher Beit Sha'an uvnotea. Asher took Beit Sha'an, Vayivlaim, and he conquered all the areas of the Canaanites. Bet Yoshvei Dor uvnotea, Ein Dor, Yoshvei Tanach. But Yoshvei Megiddo is mentioned here, but if you take a look in Shoftim, it says that they didn't take Megiddo. It's listed as a place where they didn't actually defeat it. And by the way, that happens throughout Yehoshua. There are pockets of Canaanite population that remain undefeated. All right, now the first Jewish king to take control over Megiddo is none other than King Shlomo. V'zeh dvar hamas asher ha'ela melech Shlomo. The taxes that King Shlomo takes, livnot et Beit Hashem et Beito v'et Hamilo v'et Chomat Yerushalayim v'et Chatzor v'et Megiddo v'et Gezer. Now, take note of the cities that are big cities that Shlomo builds. So you have Yerushalayim, Chatzor, Megiddo, and Gezer. Why is that important? Because you'll see some of the way the city is built is actually similar in all of these cities. The architecture is similar in all of these cities. So just to sort of give a quick recap, Megiddo is an incredibly important city. By the time the Jews come there, there have been probably 25 civilizations that have already built there. A lot of the stuff there is built by the Canaanites, and we're going to see there's even written correspondence between Pharaoh and the king of Megiddo, a few correspondences. And so it's an incredibly important city. When Yehoshua comes, he does not conquer Megiddo, and eventually Shlomo takes Megiddo, and they are paying taxes for the construction of the Beit HaMikdash. So now we go to Melachim Bet. Achaziah Melech Yehuda, when he's escaping the fate of Yehu, and King Yehu is throwing a coup, well, not King Yehu, but Yehu, who's becoming the king, he runs away to Megiddo, and there he is killed. So Megiddo is seen as a fortress, and that's where Achaziah runs to. And in Divrei Hayamim, this actually relates directly to Tisha B'Av. Anyone familiar with the Kinah we say for King Yoshiyahu on Tisha B'Av? Do we have anyone who remembers that? The Kinah that's said we say Eicha Yuam Zahav. Anyone remember that part where you speak about King Yoshiyahu on Tisha B'Av? Feel free to speak up, but yeah, do we have anyone? No? So King Yoshiyahu is killed in Megiddo. In what context? In the context of him being a righteous king who believes that when God said that if you keep the mitzvot, no war will go through your country, that means no one should walk through your country with an army. And so he goes to stop Paro, he goes into war with Paro, and he gets killed in Bikat Megiddo, which is one of the reasons the Christians believe it's the site of Armageddon. Now, this is the view you get from Megiddo. So again, you're looking at a tremendous amount of area. It's not extremely high, but it gives you a good vision of the Israel Valley. All right, here you get really what it's all about. And now here you really see a good idea of why Megiddo is so important. So all the ancient highways cross through Megiddo. It's sort of like, I think it's Chicago, right? Where all the airplanes go through Chicago. So to here, you have a situation where all the roads lead to Megiddo. So if you're going from north, from Turkey towards Jerusalem, if you're going from Egypt towards Syria, everything has to go through Megiddo. And so maybe in and of itself, it's not the biggest city, but it is definitely strategically located, not just because of the few fields that are around it. It's strategically located because it's the crossroads of the Middle East. So that's why it's really important to take a look here again at this map. It really helps you visualize the importance of Megiddo in terms of ancient highways. So this is the city of Megiddo and why it's strategic. Now, in the 15th century BCE, the same Paro, there's a rebellion. Now, this is something I was not aware of. I'll show you in a minute more about it, but it's important to internalize. When you have the land of Canaan and you have the land of Egypt, they are not independent of one another. Canaan is always either subservient to Egypt or it's being beaten by Egypt. It is not just a separate country. And this really was something that, despite everything I learned, was not on my radar. Canaan is almost like a subsidiary of Egypt. And so if the king of Megiddo doesn't listen to Egypt, Egypt comes to show who's boss. So this pharaoh, Robert, maybe you'll help me in pronouncing the name of this pharaoh because I don't think it's happening here. Pharaoh, anyone know this guy? Thutmose, whatever it is, that's his name. And he hears there's a rebellion where the Canaanite kings are not going to pay taxes. And so he decides to go to war with Megiddo. The amazing thing is that this is really the only glimpse we have as Jews into the life of the Canaanites. So you have all these letters we're going to see between Egypt and Canaan. It's amazing, right? We learn so much about, the war with the Canaanim, but we have no idea in terms of who they were. And here you go. So they have all these exchanges with Egypt, and when they don't pay taxes to Egypt, and when they're not obedient to Egypt, then Egypt comes to let them know who is boss.
Thutmose.
Now, do we have a good pronunciation?
Yes. Yeah, it's Thutmose.
Thutmose. Okay. Now here's a fascinating thing. Does anyone here remember how the Jews in Yerushalayim would let the Jews in Bavel know that the new month has been announced? Anyone have a recollection of something about that? How the Jews in Yerushalayim conveyed the fact that the new month has arrived to the people in Bavel?
Lighting torches.
Lighting torches. And now, why is that amazing? The Egyptians had a system like that to spy on Israel, to make sure that their colony, right? Canaan was a colony of Egypt, and they have the system of towers where they take a look. There's towers every mile or so, or every few miles, and they let people know, guys, there's a rebellion in our colony. It brings to mind really the Rashi in Bishalach that says, how does Paro hear that the Jews are not coming back? And so the Egyptians have this amazing system of making sure that everyone's complying with their empire. And so when the king hears, when Pharaoh hears that the Canaanites are not really keeping in line, he goes to war with Megiddo. Now, it's amazing because we have an account of this war. In one of these temples in Egypt, where they have the accounts of all the different wars, they have a explicit account of the Battle of Megiddo. To be honest, I'll confess here, I speak Hebrew, English, Yiddish, but I cannot read hieroglyphics. It's not on the day school agenda. But one of these ancient, temples they have in Egypt recounts the Battle of Thutmose with the Canaanites, and what he does is he slays the king of Megiddo and the king of Kadesh, whoever doesn't fall in line in terms of paying taxes to Egypt. So that is here's a Hebrew version of Megiddo. And this is a list of the kings who were not in compliance and were shown by Pharaoh who's boss. And so it's just an amazing thing to me. It opened a window to me because yes, Megiddo is important, but this also gives you a bigger picture in terms of what was going on at the time. It gives you a very clear picture of Canaan as an Egyptian colony, and that if you do not comply with sending your taxes and food to Egypt, then oy vavoy, you'll have Pharaoh coming up to you. And it also explains why King Yoshiyahu, many hundreds of years later, is killed in Megiddo, because that's really where the Egyptians see as their territory. And if he thinks that they're not going to be able to go through to their territory, it's almost like Taiwan is to China or something. If he thinks that he's going to stop them, then they're going to come and show him. And indeed, that's how King Yoshiyahu was killed. So that's the writing on this ancient temple in Egypt, saying that I defeated the king of Megiddo. All right, now, not only do they list their victory, but they list what they took from this victory. Now, I'm going to spare you some of the gruesome details that are shared there, but it really goes into details of what exactly was done to who. So it says the victorious army took home 340 prisoners, 2,041 Mars, 191 foals, 6 stallions, 924 chariots, which is a lot. We're going to see soon about the horses there. Armor, bows, cattle. You can see that Megiddo is not this little hilltop. I mean, just to have an area that is governing this amount of military force, you're talking about a powerhouse. You're talking about something that's very, very serious. And so when the king of Megiddo, I mean, just look at that number, 22,500 sheep, right? You read in Chumash about some of the numbers that Yaakov sent to Esav, and you're like, oh my gosh, that's a lot of sheep and cattle. It's actually like, people back then had cattle. And so he takes Megiddo, and he takes 22,500 sheep. So that's the result of this war. And needless to say that the next king is much more obedient. Now, here's another absolutely mind-boggling thing. If you didn't have this on your radar yet, you should, because it's fascinating. There's something called the El Amarna letters. Now, you'll forgive my ignorance, and I will confess to you that I did not know about the El Amarna letters. I heard them mentioned briefly, but the El Amarna letters are truly amazing documents, even though they're not paper. But they're truly amazing documents recounting the different things going on administratively back then in Canaan and in different places in Israel. And so one of these letters is an exchange between the king of Egypt and the king of Megiddo. And you have a full letter between the king of Egypt and the king of Megiddo. Here you go. And the new king of Megiddo, who is mentioned by name. I hope I'm not the only one who's mind-boggled by this. Robert, I hope you're in this with me. How absolutely amazing this is, where you have exchanges, you have letters exchanged in this time, and we have them. We have these documents. And so you have these documents that are exchanged, letters written from the king of Megiddo to Pharaoh, and he tells him exactly, he gives him a report. He says, I'm being a good boy, I'm paying you taxes, and he sends this letter to the Egyptian Paro. Maybe we have someone who we had some success with pronouncing the names. I hope we have someone else who can pronounce that. Anybody?
Akhenaten, it's an opera.
Well, Akhenaten is famous, yes.
Yes.
But the other part, the Amentup. Well, in Tanakh, it's interesting. In Tanakh, his name is Ammon. So anyhow, so he sends this letter, and here's what he writes. This is in the El Amarna letters. Here's what he writes. To the king, my lord and my son, thus says Viridia, the loyal servant of the king. At the feet of the king, my lord and my son, 7 times, and 7 times I prostrate myself. right? But that reminds you of a few times in Tanakh where people do that, right? You bow down 7 times. Let the king, my lord, take note of his servant and his city. Behold, I alone am cultivating in the town of Shunama. Does that sound familiar, by the way, the town of Shunama?
The Shunammite woman.
Oh my gosh, you should get a show bonus for that. Yes, it's the story of Elisha, who goes to the woman in Shunem, and that's, you have the whole miracle of the kid dying and coming to life. So here's the place of Shunem, and he says, I'm cultivating the town of Shunem, and as for me, I furnished forced laborers, aka slaves. Behold, now he's going to complain about those who do not behave, and soon we're going to see where we, the Jews, come into the picture of misbehaving people. Behold, the Hazanu who are near me do not do as I do. They do not cultivate in the city of Shunama, and they do not furnish forced laborers. I alone furnish. Basically, he's reporting to Pharaoh, who's economically beneficial to the empire. From the town of Yapu they come, and then he says different towns, what they do, and he tells them who's being a bad boy. Now, there's a very, very interesting thing. I'm continuing here, another letter from King Birdia, and he says, here you go. Here's a city you for sure are familiar with. May the king know that since the archers have gone back, Labayu, aka Shechem, carries out acts of hostility against me, and that we cannot shear the wool, and that we cannot pass through the gate in the presence of the Labayu, since he knows that you have not given me archers. So he's basically asking Paro for military equipment, and now he intends to take Megiddo. But the king will protect his city that the Labayu does not seize her. So basically, the king of Megiddo is asking Paro for royal protection so that he's not seized by the city of Shechem. And again, this is, yeah?
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
Yeah. Sorry, do we have a question? No? Okay. So it's just an amazing glimpse into the life of the Canaanite nations before we showed up. Absolutely amazing to see these cities that we're familiar with, whether it's Megiddo or Shechem, etc. So he says, he asks Paro, give me this amount of garrison troops, etc. Now, I just thought it's interesting. This is not a letter from the king of Megiddo, but it's from king of Jerusalem. So here's one of the first mentions. Well, I don't want to give it away. Does anyone know who the Apiru are? Where he says, why do you love the Apiru but hate the mayors? Does the word Apiru sound familiar? What happens if you switch the letter P with the letter B? Anybody? A clue about who the Apiru are? Well, the Apiru is us, the Hebrew, Abiru. In many of the ancient writings, the Jewish people are the Abiru. And so this is a letter from the king of Jerusalem to Pharaoh saying, why do you love the Jews and hate us? Which is sounds very familiar. Look at this. The Apiru has plundered all the lands of the king. If there are archers this year, the lands of the king, my lord, will remain. But if there are no archers, lost are the lands of the king, my lord. So it's just an amazing first mention of the Jewish people in recorded history, is the mentioning of the Apiru, the Abiru. That's just an amazing thing. All right. Here is a letter of curses that in Egypt, if you didn't pay your taxes, just let me just see. In Egypt, if you didn't, so if you didn't pay your taxes in Egypt, you would get you would get not only a military punishment, but you would also get a curse. They would put in curses for you. They had a hate list. I don't wish anyone ever to get hate mail, but if you ever got hate mail, here it is. In those days, they would write your name if you're a rebellious city, and it's the opposite of a mishaberach. You know how in Shul you get a mishaberach, your name is mentioned for good. If you're a city that rebelled against the Egyptians, they would put your name on a opposite of a mishaberach and put your name in one of their troves. So these are the cities who misbehaved. All right. In the year 1857, a German archaeologist named Gottlieb Schumacher goes, and he's the first to dig Megiddo in the modern era. Now, why is he an interesting fellow? Because he's not actually from Germany. Where is he from? He's from Ohio. There were many Germans who moved to America in the 1800s, and so he was a German descent, but his Mr. Gottlieb Schumacher was actually from Ohio. And it's interesting, a lot of the digs from Jericho are now in the University of Chicago. The University of Chicago was also one of the first ones to dig there. Here is ivory there, which is found made by the Canaanites. And yeah, these are the Canaanites. In case you're wondering in Shul, when we're talking about the Canaanites, who they are, here they are. Here are the Canaanites in the days of the Shoftim. They have this distinct look, and they have a throne that is similar to what we hear about the throne of King Shlomo, where you have animals sitting at the, or here it's a hybrid human animal, sitting at the feet of the throne. You have the guy who is playing the violin. Does that, not the violin, the harp. Does that sound familiar to anyone, this picture from the Canaanites? This is a Canaanite king. Does anyone, this was inscripted on the ivory. Anything here look familiar from Tanakh to anyone?
David and Shlomo.
Yeah, so the guy, the guy with the harp, right? So this was apparently a custom of the land where the king would have his throne and he had someone playing the harp for him. So this is from the days of the Shoftim. This goes back to the days of the Shoftim, and this is a Canaanite king. I personally find it fascinating. They're all, clean shaven. You don't have the Assyrian big thick beards like you see in later things with Nebuchadnezzar. All right, so this is in the days of Shoftim, and here is the last thing I will show you from that era. This is called the round Mizbeach. Take a look at this. Look at the size. In Megiddo, like I said, there are 30 civilizations. There are literally 30 levels. Archaeologists have to number every level. There are 30 levels. And in the center of the town, like in so many ancient towns, there is the center for worship. And it's actually the only Mizbeach that I've seen ever that is round. And another very interesting thing, does anyone note something that might be related to the way the Torah speaks about Mizbeach in Parshat Yitro? Anyone see anything related to Yitro in terms of the distinction between a Jewish Mizbeach and a Canaanite or basically a non-Jewish Mizbeach? What's there's two major distinctions. Anybody? What's the difference between this Mizbeach and other Mizbeachs you might see?
Stairs versus a ramp.
Very good. Yes. So the Mizbeach here has stairs, and the Torah says when you make a Mizbeach, make sure that it is a Mizbeach with a ramp and not with stairs. So that's just one way in which our Mizbeach is distinct. Obviously, the main other distinction, well, two other things. You have the component of
no pinot on Mizbeach.
Very good. Yes, correct. You have no corners in our, well, here there's no corners, but in ours there's a corner. And you know what? I actually didn't even think about that. That's a very good point, because in Judaism, not only is the Mizbeach square, but a large amount of the ritual goes, I don't want to say around because it's square, but in Judaism, the ritual is very much, you put this on this corner and you put that on that corner and you do this in that corner. Here, it's round. And so just the contrast between the different kinds of Mizbeachs is fascinating to me. And so this is one of the Canaanite Mizbeachs. You see the size is just tremendous. And the last thing that I was going to mention.
It raised.
I'm sorry?
It is raised. It's like the Bumos.
It's raised, yes. And what kind of stones do you need for the Mizbeach?
Oh.
You need stones that were not
hewn.
They were not chopped with a sword or with a something that kills. So that's just I think a tangential point to look at the Mizbeach here from the days of the Canaanites and see the many differences between their Mizbeach and our Mizbeach. I mean, there's more differences. You see the trees here. Well, you're not allowed to have trees near the Jewish Mizbeach. So there's several differences there. All right, here we're transitioning now away from the Canaanites. I'm just going to quickly summarize what things are truly mind-boggling about what we just saw. One is you have the concept of the letters. To me, is the most mind-boggling one. You have letters, explicit exchanges between the king of Megiddo and the pharaohs. You have the concept of rebellion, because Megiddo and Canaan are essentially an Egyptian colony, which can transform your understanding of so many parts of Tanakh. You have this, if you don't behave in Canaan, the Egyptian army will show up. And once he has some kind of victory, Pharaoh goes back and he puts that victory on the walls of his temple, and he puts curses for the cities that are misbehaving. And then you have the exchange of the king of Yerushalayim writing to Pharaoh, which is just so funny to me, because it's so similar to today, what you have between Israelis, Palestinians, right? Everyone's sending a letter to Washington, and he says, why do you like the Jews so much more than me, right? It's like nothing has changed. And so the king of Yerushalayim sends a letter to the Pharaoh, and he says, what is with you in liking these Jews? And so, yeah, that's another thing. All right, now we're going on to the days of Shlomo. So somehow in the time of the Shoftim, the Jews were not able to take Yericho. But eventually in the time of Shlomo, it's taken, and it becomes a center of the Israelite kingdom. Now, interestingly, we don't have much of this in our Tanakh, but actually the evidence points to the biggest builder, actually not one of, the biggest builder of the city of Megiddo from our history is King Achav, who is a fine guy short of his murder of every single prophet of God, and attempting to kill Eliyahu Hanavi, and marrying Izebel, who became an icon of wickedness, and getting the entire Am Yisrael, the 10 tribes, to worship Avodah Zarah. But short of those things, he's a fine guy. And he famously is told what Eliyahu tells him in Yisrael, which is just this area. He tells him the famous saying, "Haratzachta vegam yarashta," have you killed and have you also inherited, when he takes the Kerem of Navot. But this Achav guy, with everything that we have against him, he is the one to build up Megiddo, and it's actually something that's used by many archaeologists and historians to show that the kingdoms of Israel and Yehuda were unified at some point, and just to assess the size. So it's really, we don't have much from the kingdom of Israel. We as Jews, we come from the tribe of Yehuda, so we're always excited to hear stuff from the Yehuda history. But let's not forget that there's Israel, and so this is actually one of the rare glimpses we have into the kingdom of Israel. So this is a pasuk from the days of Shoftim, and in a moment you'll tell me why I'm reading it or what I'm reading. Uboaz ala hasha'ar vayeshev sham v'hinei hagoel over asher diber Boaz vayomer sura shva po ploni almoni vayasar vayeshev vayikach 10 anashim miziknei ha'ir vayomer shvu po vayeshevu. And then he continues. I'm going to pasuk Yud Aleph. Vayomru kol ha'am asher bashar v'hazkenim edim yiten Hashem et ha'isha ba'al betecha. What did I just read, and why is it so related to what we're about to see? Even though this is from the times of the Shoftim, all of this, anyone want to say? I don't want to take this away from anybody. But all of the city business, anyone want to say it? Robert, I feel like we're counting on you. Why are we reading something from Ruth here?
Well, they're conducting business at the city gate.
The city gate, and we're going to see that the city gate is a similar structure in the 4 cities that I mentioned that the pasuk says that Shlomo built. So you actually have identical city gates in these different cities. What you're looking at are 3 different cities. On the right, you see Megiddo. but on the left, you see Chatzor and Gezer. And the city gate is not just a gate. It's a gate with chambers, meaning if you go into the city, you will go through the Fifth Avenue of the city, meaning you're going to see a place where, the Beit Din sit, maybe where the commerce is. The Sha'ar Ha'ir is not just a few old people huddling inside a door. It is an entire area, right? And just look at those walls, right? And look at the chambers. This is the city hall. The city hall is the city gate, and that's why Boaz goes to the city hall and the city gate. This is where everything is done. And it's just absolutely amazing that the city gates in these cities that we mentioned, Gezer, Chatzor, and Megiddo, all from the same time, all same structures. The architecture is exactly identical. And this is built, I wouldn't say by a Jew, but I would say it was built by an Israelite, because this is built by the great kingdom, whether it's Shlomo or Achav. So this is the city gate. I'll give everyone a few moments to notice the details here. You see, it's usually 6 chambers, 3 on each side. You have the gate, and all business in the city is done here. And that's exactly what you find in Megiddo. So this is evidence A, to the concept of Sha'ar Ha'ir, B, to the identical builder, where you have the same city gate built in these 3 different areas that are built either, again, Shlomo, Achav, but either way, they're central to the kingdom of Israel. Here's a map of how it might look at those times. You go in, there's these chambers. This is really just an illustration of how city gates were done at the time. You can also see the, what do you call that? Underground, not a channel. What do you call this? What do you call this part? Not exactly a channel. It's a little, in Hebrew, the word is te'ala. It's a little conduit of water or waste or who knows what, or for rain. Anyhow, that's it. Here's a better look at the city gate in Megiddo, which is a typical Jewish / Israel, actually, again, Israelite type of place. Alrighty, here is an amazingly central thing to the kingdom of Israel and to assessing any power at those times. Shlomo 40,000 orvot susim. Shlomo has 40,000 horse stables, lemerkavo 12,000 parashim, and 12,000 chariot riders. And here's another pasuk from Yeshaya: Hoya yordim mitzrayim le'ezra al susim yisha'enu v'yivtechu al rechev kirav. Woe to those who go to Egypt for help with horses, and they trust horses and chariot riders. Now it's interesting because the horses and the chariot riders, that is how military strength is assessed those days. It is like the difference today between an army that has a tank and an army that doesn't have a tank. It's like the difference between armies that have F-35s and armies that are still flying MiG-23s. You cannot compare the strength of a nation that has horses and chariots to the strength of a nation that's still walking on foot, having donkeys and mules. Very interesting. I see we have an interesting comment here. A similarity between Egyptian priests and Kohanim. They had to ritually purify with water before they go into the inner chamber. I did not know this. Excellent, very good. By the way, any other questions, comments are always welcome. Now, horses. So horses are the prime way of assessing the value of a nation in those times, the strength of a nation. Hashem tells Bnei Israel, don't go with that. Obviously, this is not a real horse, but at the site of Megiddo, they have these metal horses, and there are these huge stables, huge stables. In fact, here is a coin from the ancient kingdom of Israel, which, again, I find mind-boggling because with all the attention we give Yehuda, it's important to remember there's also the kingdom of Israel. And what's the number one thing you would be proud of if you are a member of the kingdom of Israel? What is it? It is that you have chariots. That's that's the biggest accomplishment you can have, because if you have chariots and horses, you're a independent military power. So here are these areas where the horses are kept. Can anyone figure out what these things on the side are? It's pretty obvious, but maybe not to everyone. Does anyone want to say what these in this designated for horses area? Anyone?
Troughs.
Ah, very good. Yes, these are troughs, but also for water, right? Is trough for food and water, or either one?
I think it's for water.
For water. Okay, so yeah, so these are the troughs, and we're going to see soon that the city has an exceptional water source. And so the fact that it has horses here is not just a random fact. It is a sign of military independence. It's a sign that, look, this city can take care of itself, and is part of a superpower. Here are some of the non-Jewish chariots. These are already the Assyrians, who come with heavy chariots, and then later they destroy the Jewish ones. All right, here is a coin found in Megiddo. And does anyone want to read what it says on the top left coin? On the top left corner, what this coin says on it, or explain anything that you see on this coin? Anyone see what it says? So there's 3 words.
I'm not getting the screen for this. I don't know anyone else.
Oh, you're not. Is anyone else? So
No, I have it.
Here. So Leshema Eved Yerovam. So the guy who has this, his name is Shema, and he is the servant of Yerovam. And here you have the size of it in centimeters. So it's actually an astonishing find, because again, it's something that we have from the time of the kingdom of Israel. And it says here that unfortunately the original was lost in 1904. Like I said, a lot of these items were taken to the University of Chicago. Maybe if you look around Chicago, ask anyone if they saw this lovely coin. But Leshema Eved Yerovam. This is of Shema, the servant of Yerovam. Now we come to this. This is a huge structure. What is this structure? This is the silo. So you can see they actually have steps going down and steps going up separately, meaning there are people that are bringing stuff in, people that are taking out, and you can just imagine the amount of people this is feeding and the amount of administrative power whoever controlled the city had. So this is a trough. I don't know, can anyone give me a Manhattan equivalent of how big this is? Not a trough, it's a silo. This is like the size of a good Manhattan building, right? This is not in height, but in width, it's very, 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 very wide. So you have that. All right, last but not least is you have the water system, which is built about, say, maybe 100 years before or around the same area as, remember we looked at Chizkiyahu's tunnel? So this is Chizkiyahu's tunnel in terms of avoiding the outside and staying inside. This is the same idea. It keeps people from going anywhere else. You don't even need to leave. It used to be you can leave the city wall by a few feet. Here you just get it all. Look at the amount of water there. I'll give you another sense of how deep it is. By the way, most of this, if not all of it, is carved in the time of the Canaanites. What the Jews did is they make sure that it's included inside of the wall, that you don't even need to step outside of the wall. But it's just incredible in terms of the infrastructure and how many people this involved. All right, here is just a map of the site. If you go there today, I hope you do. So you have number 1 is the water source. Number 2 is you have the Canaanite gate of the city. Next, you have the Canaanite palace. Remember, this city is mostly the Jewish kingdom. The Israelite kingdom is the last layer almost. So this is all early stuff. Finally, here you have the Israelite gate. Then you have the Canaanite palace, and here you have the horses stables. Then you have it 9. Remember, we saw that big mizbeach. There you have that big mizbeach. Then you have another important thing is in 10, you have the burial spaces. And I'm trying to think what else you would want to see. 15 is the very, very big silo. Where is that? 15. You have the silo, and that's also 20 is where you go down to the water, and here's more of the water. So this is the site of Megiddo, and finally its last stint. After the destruction of the temple, nobody really hears about Megiddo. There's an area there named Kfar Otnai, and a famous fellow lived there. His name is Rabbi Gamliel. Here are different sources in the Talmud where Rabbi Gamliel is in Kfar Otnai, and that is where Megiddo was. Here's another source. By the way, all these sources seem to involve Kutim, who are not really Jewish but somewhat Jewish, and they all come to Rabban Gamliel. Finally, the Romans turn it to a place called Legio. What does that remind you of? What word does Legio remind you of?
Legion.
Legion, and it's a pretty self-explanatory name. The Romans, so you have, it's Megiddo for thousands of years, then you have, it's named Kfar Otnai, but also you have, the Romans have a place called Legions. Now, of course, if you're Jewish, you want to make sure that there's some sense of closure here, and if you go there today, thank God, there is, who would imagine after these thousands of years, if you asked one of these Canaanites who's going to be there in 2022, you have Kibbutz Megiddo, founded at the foot of this hill. You can see they have a lovely pool. And this is Kibbutz Megiddo, founded in 1949. Obviously, many Holocaust survivors post-Holocaust come and build this place. It's called the Kibbutz Megiddo. It's not a religious kibbutz, but it is nonetheless, Jews returning to the land after many, many thousands of years. And well, not many, many thousands, 2,000s, but that's still a lot. And that's what you have today. You have a place called Kibbutz Megiddo. And for some reason, the Christians still believe that the ultimate battle between evil and good is going to happen in Megiddo. There may be all kinds of reasons for that. There may be the reason of King Yoshiao being killed there. There may be the reason of them knowing maybe about all the battles between Paro and the local Canaanite king. But it definitely looks better in the movies in terms of Armageddon. This looks more like a place you would want to sit and drink a cup of tea and relax, learn Daf Yomi maybe. But it doesn't look like a place for Armageddon or some kind of epic battle. So that is the story of Megiddo. And if anyone has any other questions, comments,